Good evening. I'm Jennifer Rabb, and I have the great privilege of serving as president of Hunter College, where the American dream continues to come true on campus or online, just as it has for more than 150 years since our founding. It's a pleasure to welcome you tonight to another edition of our signature Zoom series, Hunter at Home. Hard as it is to believe, this series has been running for almost a full year now. Ever since the COVID lockdown began, Hunter at Home programs have helped the Hunter community stay current on the pandemic and also stay inspired by the cultural, literary, artistic, and scientific breakthroughs that continue to emerge during this fraught period, enhancing and influencing our lives even during our long and sometimes frustrating battle with coronavirus. Over these past months, we have featured programs on painters, sculptors, artists, explorations of history, architecture, and music, sessions on financial investing and botany, and even programs on dolphins and elephants. And as we know from your response, you are just as pleased to hear about breakthroughs in cultural understanding as you are to keep abreast of the latest developments on the health front. That is why we've been so proud to feature some of our star faculty and our deeply valued partners, all of them so generously willing to share their expertise with us, and tonight is no exception. Before we begin this evening's event, let me take an additional moment to thank the many friends and donors who have stepped up during these past 11 months to support Hunter's mission and help make possible our student and faculty success. Your generosity and loyalty have shown an inspiring commitment to our Hunter motto, Mihi Cura Futuri, the care of the future is mine. Thank you so much for helping us get through the challenges of today so we can be stronger tomorrow. Speaking of our future and the youngsters who must one day lead it, I am enormously pleased to welcome to Hunter at Home the distinguished Dr. Harold S. Koplowitz. Harold is one of the nation's leading child and adolescent psychiatrists and the author of an important new parenting book we are here tonight to discuss, The Scaffold Effect: Raising Resilient, Self-Reliant, Secure Kids in an Age of Anxiety. In this important new study, Dr. Koplowitz expertly guides parents through the strategies they need to raise empowered, capable individuals by giving them the tools to flourish on their own. Harold, your vision mirrors our Hunter mission, and your sage advice takes on critical importance as we navigate the opportunities and dangers of our long, distressing lockdown. Booklist has already raved about your new book, noting that it shares the sweet spot between permissive and controlling parenting and reminds caregivers that it is never too late to help your children become the best versions of themselves. What an extraordinary endorsement. Dr. Koplowitz is the founding president and medical director of the Child Mind Institute, an independent nonprofit nationally dedicated to transforming the lives of children and families struggling with mental health and learning disorders. Harold is consistently ranked among the top U.S. and New York doctors and appears regularly on CBS, The Today Show, The Oprah Winfrey Show, and Anderson Cooper on CNN to provide guidance and support to parents and families. I am so proud and grateful for the partnership Hunter has established with Dr. Koplowitz and the Child Mind Institute, which has been for so long our advisor for incredible mental health advice for Hunter's elementary and high schools and our other partner schools. We simply could not have navigated many of the tragedies and challenges over the years at our K-12 schools without Harold Koplowitz's help. We are also pleased to have partnered with the Child Mind Institute on many events at our Roosevelt House about mental health and careers in science. We appreciate all we have done together with CMI and look forward to building on our common commitment to preparing the next generation and training the best prepared teachers, social workers, and psychologists. Harold, we are grateful for your partnership and pleased to be able to celebrate your impactful new book tonight. On a personal note, I have had the privilege of knowing the doctor for many years, and I can attest that having a friend like Harold is good for your mental health. So Harold, thank you for always being a valuable guide, counselor, and inspiration. We are also excited to welcome tonight an esteemed expert in her own right, Hunter Professor of Psychology, Tracy Dennis Tawari. Tracy will moderate this discussion about the scaffold effect and help us better understand how parents can adopt the scaffold method to help their children in the face of challenges brought on by the pandemic. Tracy is one of our faculty thought leaders. A professor of psychology at Hunter and at the CUNY Graduate Center, she is another of the nation's great experts on stress and anxiety and how to reduce both. She is a pioneer of digital therapeutics and the creator of the anxiety reduction app Personal Zen, which not only helps us reduce stress, but builds stress resilience for the future. Tracy now serves as co-executive director of Hunter's Center for Health Technology, which is working to bring researchers, innovators, and funders together to make sure to bridge the health care equity gap. Tracy focuses her own scholarly research, writing, and outreach on how flexibly adjusted emotions can increase lifelong well-being. Her current project, funded by the National Institutes of Health, deals with teen anxiety and suicide risk and how access to and dependence on digital technology affects our emotional health. It is a crucially important undertaking. And Tracy has a forthcoming book of her own, which we look forward to discussing as soon as it comes off the press, Future Tense, Making Anxiety Our Superpower. In short, we have not one but two superpowers here on Hunter at Home today to talk about our kids, their problems, and their parents in the age of COVID and beyond. I look forward to this very important discussion, and with that, take pride in turning the proceedings over to our two experts, Dr. Koplowitz and Professor Dennis Tawari. Thank you both for sharing your work with our Hunter at Home audience, and thank all of you for being with us tonight. Please welcome Harold and Tracy.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, President Rabb, for that introduction. Thank you, everyone, for being here. And Harold, it's wonderful to see you. I'm really looking forward to our conversation about parenting, about your wonderful new book, The Scaffold Effect. And I know you wrote this book before the pandemic, but I think it's just more relevant than ever. So I'm really pleased to be able to be speaking with you tonight.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here, and I love being at Hunter, even if it's virtual.
Well, so let's start with the main metaphor or the idea of your book. You know, there's so many pieces of advice that I'm sure that we child psychologists think about and psychiatrists think about as we work with parents whose kids are struggling with mental health concerns, with anxiety, depression. Why did you choose scaffolding as the idea to help parents navigate these challenges?
So I could tell you that for the past decade, my colleagues and I have heard from parents from all different socioeconomic groups, every different ethnic and racial group, about how they worry about doing too much or too little for their kids, and the fear that when they grow up, they won't be independent. They won't be able to do it without me, the parents say. And so we started to think about the fact that for years, what makes the treatment different at the Child Mind Institute is that parents are involved in all the treatments. They are the scaffolding that stays around the child, and the child's the building. And that the scaffold can't be too tight and can't be too loose because the child needs to establish a firm foundation and continue to grow. And the idea that a scaffold eventually leaves, the building is finished, the scaffold comes down, and if the scaffolding has been proper, the foundation is strong, the building will stay up. And frankly, our metaphor goes a little further in the respect that if something goes wrong when your child is 24 or 32 or 35, they can scaffold themselves. I mean, the best end to this story would be that when your child is a sophomore or junior in college and feels sad or feels too anxious, that they recognize that they can go and get some help. They can scaffold themselves. If as a freshman, they can't get that paper done, they know they can go to the Learning Center or go to a TA and say, I need some help. I'm having trouble even with the outline. So the concept of a scaffold just being, pillars and planks, support and structure and encouragement, and then a plank, which is patience and awareness and warmth and dispassion, which I'm terrible at, and monitoring. And if one can keep going back to that simple metaphor and that simple structure, no matter how old your child is, there's always the ability to help the child continue to grow, to continue to leave, so, the comfort zone and go into the growth zone to try new things.
Right. And a lot of people who've heard this concept of scaffolding before think, oh, but that's just for the young ones. But one thing I really loved about the book is that so many of your examples are with older kids, are with young adults. And it's about, and I'm going to ask you about some of your favorite stories from the book to share in a minute, but the idea that people, when we scaffold correctly, when we find that sweet spot, that kids then have the opportunity to build those skills that they take with them for life. I think that's a really powerful one, and one that can work whether, maybe our child is having new problems at age 20, or maybe they're having problems at age 2, but the principles remain.
Well, I can tell you that, I did something else in the book that I read a lot of parenting books, and a lot of times I just feel inadequate when I read them. Yet again, some expert seems to be standing up there shaking his finger at how I messed up. And I decided that the only way that I could talk to other parents is to admit that I made mistakes also. And that when I think about it, how could I correct it? Because essentially, the message we should give to our kids is that failure is an option and success is an option, but we're not going to celebrate either one of them. We're going to celebrate effort. And when things don't work out the way they wanted to, and they planned and they had wished, it's our job not to rescue them, but to brainstorm with them and say, what tools could you use next time? And how many tools do you have in your toolbox? And, how do you select the right tool so that you can get up and run the race another time or take the test, the next test again? So one of my favorite stories is about my youngest son. I'm a father of 3 sons. And when my youngest son, who was by far the most social of my 3 kids, he was the alpha male in his grade, and everyone turned to him, and he was always so much more mature, and we had the most communication. And I got a phone call right before March break, so it was about this time of year. He was in 8th grade, and a dear friend got me on the phone and said, I've been trying to make this phone call, and it's very difficult, but I have to tell you, I heard from other people at a dinner party 3 nights ago that Sam and 2 of his friends were either stoned out of their head or totally wasted with booze at a party. And I did the typical thing that most parents did. I said, no, you must be mistaken. It can't be Sam. And he said, Harold, I hung up the phone twice when I made this call. You know how much I love you and how much I care about your kids. And I hope you would do this if you knew this was happening to my daughter or my son. I'm telling you, I can give you the names of the people who told me about it. And if that's necessary. I said, no, it's not necessary. But I have to tell you, my gut response was, oh, I can't believe this. He deceived me. He had made a deal that he would not smoke marijuana until he graduated high school. I thought to myself, I should go straight to the school, pull him out of class and beat him on the street, so everyone could see that I take this seriously. I mean, I was ashamed. It was about me. It wasn't about him. I thought people are talking about my kid and me, the child psychiatrist, and how I screwed up. And I waited a few hours because my wife actually is a school teacher. So when school got out, I called her and she said, no, they must be mistaken. It can't be Sam. And I said, no, I'm a few hours ahead of you. It's definitely Sam. And so I left work early. I got home. I left him a message on his phone that basically said, please come home and don't bring your usual posse with you. We have to talk. And we sat down with him in the living room and we had a conversation. And we said, we know everything. So I'd appreciate it if you would tell me the truth, because what happened on Saturday? And he said, what do you mean? I said, Sam, you have this opportunity to get yourself out of this. And he started to cry. Tears started to roll down his eyes. And he said, we got drunk. I said, pot? He said, no, I made a deal, no pot. And we then asked him, what did you drink? And he said, vodka. I said, whose vodka? One of my friends brought over the vodka. What did you use? How much did you drink? And he said, 3 shots. And my wife said, really? What did you use for a shot glass? He said, orange juice glasses. So he 3, and I just didn't, again, you don't have to have the answer on the spot. And so what we said to him was, we're done. Conversation's over. Let's go to our respective places. there will be a consequence. We're not sure what the consequence is, but we're going to think about it. And I have to tell you, I thought when I was a little kid, my father used to say, this hurts me more than it hurts you. And I felt that way. I felt, at least I wasn't, he kept his word about the marijuana. He actually told me later on that he had told all of his friends that he promised his father he wouldn't smoke marijuana until he graduated high school. So even in 10th and 11th grade, his friends wouldn't pass him a joint because they knew he made this deal and they wanted him to stick with the deal. And so he made it all the way through high school without smoking. But it took my wife and I an effort to step back and to realize there had to be a consequence. There was a consequence for breaking our trust. There was a consequence for breaking the rules, the structure of our house, of how we behave. And we finally thought about it, and the punishment was that he was grounded for 30 days. And for a very popular social kid, that felt very hard. He didn't get locked in his room. We went out with him. We went to the movies. He was our date for dinner. We gave up our socializing that month, and he didn't like it, but he didn't die from that punishment. And there was a consequence. And I think he learned that there would be another consequence if he broke the rules again, that there were certain rules that we just were demanded that he abide by. And I think that, your kids are going to mess up. There are going to be mistakes. And by the way, parents can mess up. They could do what I did, which is just, what I thought, which is to beat their kid or to yell at their kid or to shame their child, all of which is just the wrong thing to do. And then you can say, I'm sorry, I made a mistake. I'm going to redo it. That's one of the messages that I hope comes across in the Scaffold effect, that there is always the ability in the sport of being a parent of a redo, of a replay. You can't do that in baseball or in soccer or in a tennis match. There's no redos. But in parenting, there is the ability to model to your kids that you made a mistake and that you'd like to redo it. You were either too harsh or too lenient, or that you didn't have all the facts. I have to tell you, what bothers me about that story is that I made the two phone calls to the two other boys' parents. And one of the parents actually said, oh, they did it again? And I said, what do you mean? Oh, they got drunk at Christmas also. And I was so annoyed. And I said, what are you talking about? And she said, oh, they're just kids. I felt like saying yes. And that's why they have parents. I mean, she didn't give me that same courtesy that I was giving her. And, I certainly didn't tell my son, how disappointed I was in the other boy's mom, because the rules of our house are different than those. But I can tell you that we kept open lines of communication to the point that I think that was actually a learning experience. That later on, when he was a senior in high school, he actually said, you seem to be getting a little loose about the rules about marijuana. And I said, what do you mean? He said, you don't seem to be as firm. I made a deal with you. I'm going to stick to the deal. I mean, he was really proud that he could, keep his word to me all the way through graduation. So, I think that the role of parents just continues all the time, but that idea of structure, of what is the rules of your house, what are the ways you communicate, the support that you give your kids, which is unconditional. You tell your kids that if they get drunk, they should call you. But that means that if they do call you, you don't shame them, you don't blame them, you pick them up. The next day, you can have a conversation about what happened and what went right and what went wrong, and you thank them for calling you, and you give them encouragement. But the other part, I said before, I'm bad with dispassion, is that you stay cool. You do not yell, you do not overdo it. You're not a cheerleader that goes overboard and blowing smoke. And at the same time, you don't, terrorize your kid and shame them that they'll never be able to tell you when they mess up again.
And so much of that resonates with me, and especially the combination of their techniques, ways of doing things, and then there's an emotional tone to it. And I would argue, that probably just forgiving ourselves when we mess up, because you know what, we're going to yell. There was some new data that just came out saying that kids are reporting that their parents, especially their moms, are yelling more than ever before during the pandemic. And I think half of the battle is to forgive ourselves and know, even when we do yell, even when we're that mom in the book that called the teacher up and yelled at the teacher, you can, which was an unbelievable story, you can do that redo. And
let's just quickly tell a story of a working mom, high-powered job, really caring, juggling, no COVID, just juggling. Husband's out of town, and her son, who is in 6th grade, tells her on Friday that he has a science project due for a science fair on Monday. And it is the most complicated set of instructions, and they have nothing in the house. They have cardboard and scotch tape, and she can see from these instructions that they're expecting, not Rubrik's Cube, but a remarkable project. And she's so frustrated, and she's already had one drink, and she picks up the phone and she calls the teacher at home. Only, private school can you get a hold of the home. And she yells at the teacher and says, "You're an incompetent teacher. How could you do this? What do you think parents are, all the parents are doing these projects anyway. Don't you think I have anything better to do but then do a science project?" She just went on and on and on. And she told me the story, and I was trying not to roll my eyes or show shock.
It couldn't have been worse.
And she said, and the boy, when he was alone with me in the room, said, "I was feeling so bad for my mom, and I felt so bad for the teacher." Eventually, the mom picked up the phone on that Monday and apologized to the teacher. And she recognized that she wasn't on top of it, that her son had a tendency to be pretty sloppy with his assignments and to hide things from her, and that she had to be, more conscientious about organizing him. And the best part is that they went to the science fair, and that his project that mom and he worked on over the weekend really was pretty sucky. It was made of cardboard and scotch tape, and the other stuff looked super professional, like it could be in an Intel or a Westinghouse. And she said no one died. They didn't die of embarrassment. They didn't die of the bad grade that he was going to get, and they learned something from it. And I even said to her, "I hope you learned that you could forgive yourself," because especially during COVID. Remember, the book was written about a year and a half ago and re-edited and then published. It takes 9 months. And so the book, the most important thing parents have to do to start with, to be a scaffolding parent, is to scaffold themselves. They have to lay their own foundation. They have to give themselves support and structure and encouragement. And during COVID, that means you got to sleep. That means you have to eat good food. That means you have to do something spiritual. So if you're not going to do mindfulness and you're not going to go to church, at least, be with your own thoughts for a few minutes every day. And it means take a walk if you're not going to go to a gym. You have to take care of yourself, because if your scaffold isn't strong enough, an unexpected disaster like COVID comes around and can knock not only the scaffold down, but can knock down the building as well.
Yeah, I want to.
So that's this is a good time to be kind to ourselves.
I want to turn to that in a moment, because I really liked that. I believe I've written down, I believe that was chapter 2 on self-care of parent. And I think that was really smart to lead with all that. But I want to add to something you were saying before we talk about that, which is that it's not just that you can forgive yourself as a parent, as the yelling at the teacher parent did, and all of us have gone through, but the very act of saying, "I was wrong, and you know what, we're going to figure this out together," is really powerful. I'm writing a book on anxiety, and I have a son who tends to be a little anxious, and I have all these stories that I'm trying not to put all of them in the book, because the poor kid's going to kill me when he's a little older. He's 12 right now. But there was this one moment when he was learning to ride a bike, and he was fearful about it. And I thought I was being a very tough love parent, and I thought I was being really great, but I was getting frustrated with him. And, but I took a video of it, and then we stopped, and he was really just feeling like it was too much and feeling overwhelmed. And so we stopped. And now it turns out the whole time I was talking with him, my video on my phone had been recording, unbeknownst to me. And what I realized, and so we got up to the top of the hill, and then I saw it, and I looked at it, and I'm telling you, Harold, I burst out crying, because what I thought I was doing with him, which was, come on, you don't have to be afraid, tough love, was actually things like threatening to push him off his bike.
Oh,
no, I'm not joking. It could.
And there's a recording, right?
And it was, but I didn't even realize it, but I had the recording. And so, what I decided to do? I decided to watch it with him. And I was crying as I was watching it with him, because I felt so heartbroken that I had done this, that I wasn't supporting accepting his fear and anxiety.
And being aware, remember, patience.
And I wasn't aware. I wasn't
of what he could or couldn't do, right?
No, but the act of watching it with him and me saying to him, "Buddy, I want to say sorry, because this was not about you. This was about me." And then I pulled one from Mr. Rogers, because I think that was when the Mr. Rogers doc had just come out a little while. But I love you just the way you are. Like but when I tell you that his little shoulders, which had been up here, went down, and it took our trust to a different level, even though I completely
So let's think
destroyed
about
it.
that.
It was a wonderful experience
Because
for
one
us.
of the parts about scaffolding is, first of all, self-care is childcare. Again and again, self-care is childcare. And the other important part is that you want your kids not to be so caught up by the scaffold that they can't try and risk things, right? And at the same time, we can't pull so far away that the kid feels totally insecure. The building is shaky. So think of it as the comfort zone, the growth zone, and then almost like a toxic zone. So clearly, we want our kids to try new things in math or in piano or in baseball. But if we push them too far, they shut down. It's the brain just gets, it's too anxious, the coordination goes, and so we have to pull back. But at the same time, I think we're so protective of our kids. As example, that you looked at your video and you thought, oh, I was toxic, and you start to cry. You feel so guilty about it. So that I think it's in our DNA to always want to swoop in and rescue them. And that's just not good parenting. So there's a story in the book where my very socially reticent oldest son comes home, and he goes to a private school in New York and announces to us in 5th grade that there is going to be a Thanksgiving Day assembly for the middle school from 4th grade to 8th grade. And that he has decided with one of his friends that they are going to do a rap dance in homage to Michael Jordan. He loves Michael Jordan. There's posters all over his room of Michael Jordan. And I say, a rap dance? And he says, yes, we're going to dance in front of the entire assembly. And I'm thinking he might as well do surgery on the stage. How is he going to dance? You know, this socially shy kid. And my wife says, oh, it sounds like it's going to be great. I think it's going to be great. It sounds like it's going to be awful. This is the kind of thing patients talk about decades later, about how mortified and traumatic this episode has been. So 3 days before the event, he comes, and Adam backed out. And I said, well, you know, it wasn't meant to be. And he said, no, I'm going to do it by myself. And I've been working with the dance instructor, and she's choreographed it for me. I'm thinking, it's just unbelievable. My wife says, I'm sure it's going to be fine. Now, I am, so worried that he will die from the embarrassment. Isn't that what it is? You know, he'll be so mortified, it will completely color his entire middle school experience. Now, I don't say any of this. I am smart enough to hold this in and to be aware that this is important for him. And so the day comes, I'm working, and my wife is actually a school teacher at that school. She's at the back of the assembly. I call her a few hours later, and she says, it's unbelievable. He just did great. He had all these moves, and the crisscross was the music, and it was really terrific. It really was a growth experience for him. He stepped out of that comfort zone. For a kid who's very shy and socially reticent, it was the right thing to do. And we didn't push him, but I came close to holding him back, fearful that he would be hurt somehow. Fast forward 20 years, we're at his 30th birthday party, and one of his friends stands up and says, hi, everyone. Everyone knows how much I hate public speaking, but I love Josh, so I want to say happy birthday. But Josh doesn't remember this, but the first time I laid eyes on him, I was in 4th grade, and at the Thanksgiving Day assembly, and they announced that Josh Koplowitz from the House 52 was going to do an interpretive dance in honor of Michael Jordan. And Aaliyah says, even in 4th grade, I knew that was social suicide. And the lights go off, and a spotlight comes on Josh, and he's wearing a baseball hat backwards and a Chicago Bulls basketball outfit, super baggy. And within a minute, crisscross is playing, and within a minute, he is spinning and flipping over. And the entire assembly, he says, has gotten up and is screaming and clapping, go Josh, go Josh. It's unbelievable, Aaliyah says. And then Monday after Thanksgiving, I see him, and he's just as unobtrusive as always. His head is down, he's carrying too many books. But Aaliyah says, I talked about that dance to my parents so many times about how brave Josh was. And that if he could be that brave, I could be brave too. Now, this is 20 years later, but the fact that I almost held him back and let my fear of him not being successful and him looking foolish not only would have been a bad thing for him, you know, a good scaffold holds on and just says, we'll support you, we'll encourage you. And if it doesn't work out, you won't die of embarrassment and we'll bring some together. It helped other kids. Other kids must have looked at this socially reticent kid and said, if he could do it, I could do brave things also.
So say you're a parent who's been, a helicopter, or now the new thing is, of course, snowplow parenting for the past 10 years. And they say, oh gosh, I've been making all these mistakes. What do I do? So where do they begin, Harold? How can
So first of all,
they
I think we
finish?
can always redo the blueprint. And I think
Mhm.
what better time to do it than when we're spending so much time with our kids, right?
Mhm.
So the first thing that I think parents have to recognize is that there's two habits that we do as human beings. We negatively track and we have confirmation bias. So what does that mean? We are really good at telling you what's wrong with this picture. And so we are very good at telling you that your kid is chewing with his mouth open, that he didn't put his napkin on his lap, that his tone of his voice is too loud, or the volume is too loud, that he has a snarky tone, that he didn't pick up his clothes. There are endless amounts of things that you can negatively track. The second thing we do is we decide that we either have a lazy child or a bad child or even a good child. And we, in the same way that we always watch Fox or CNN or MSNBC, we confirm that we are always right. We just keep saying again and again, this is the lazy child or this is the good child. And if we can stop negatively tracking, if we can track all behavior and catch our child being good, catch him being good. Thank you for setting the table. I really appreciate it. I asked you and you really did a good job. That's a really funny story. Thank you for telling me about it. And then how about thank you for cleaning up? So 3 positive labeled praise for every one time you're going to do some corrective negative statement. First and foremost, your kid is going to think that the body snatcher took their mother. Second, after around 2 weeks, your kid is going to give you more good behavior because kids like that praise. They might not tell you they like the praise, but they want to be considered good. And your negative bias will, or confirmation bias, will disappear because it turns out it's not good for the good kid to think he's good because inevitably he's going to feel like he's going to let his father or mother down. And it's certainly bad for the bad girl to always think she's bad because it builds bad self-esteem. So those are 2 things that we could do tomorrow. You know, track all behavior, catch our kids being good, no matter what age they are, and then also let go when you're catching them being good. Think carefully that before you say something that's corrective or negative, you have to say 3 positive things. So that means that there's a lot of insignificant off-task behavior that shouldn't be reinforced. So if their napkin isn't on their lap, just take a deep breath. If they're too quiet and they're not being nice, you know, just let it go. Remember, catch them being good before saying anything negative about them.
Right.
It
And
is
another,
truly amazing how the blueprint will change.
and it's also a great thing to, I think, for parents to keep as a reminder that if we really want to change behavior, stopping the undesired behavior is much less effective than building the new behavior we want. And that, as you're saying, if we build that new behavior, the bad stuff is going to start falling away. But let's turn to the pandemic for a moment, because again, all these principles, important all the time, more important than ever during the pandemic. One thing that I've noticed with my own children, with children in my community and my friends' children, what they're really struggling with now is finding joy, figuring out how to savor the good things in life. And we know that a lot of mental health problems are on the rise with kids. But what some of the data are starting to show is that the rise in depression is even more significant than the rise in anxiety and some other problems. And I think it might be linked to this difficulty of finding those things to savor in life, again, with so much taken away from us.
So you know, Tracy, we have an interesting study. Morgan Stanley, about a year ago, before the pandemic, which for 65 years has been investing in children's health, made a decision to put $20 million into children's mental health. And they started this Alliance for Child Mental Health, and they gave a big chunk of money to Morgan Stanley Children's Hospital and a large contribution to the Jed Foundation and to the Steve Fund, which is a college-based program for African American kids suffering from mood disorders, and a very large contribution to the Child Mind Institute for us to redo our website so that it was in Spanish, that the reading level was dropped from 10th grade to 5th grade, and that we made more of an effort to get information out to families in rural areas, the inner city, and Spanish-speaking families. Since COVID hit 1 month after they gave us all this money, they have started to fund research looking at COVID. And one of the first things we told them is we would like to look at children and adults' mood changes that could be caused by COVID. So we surveyed 6,000 adults, 3,000 from the United Kingdom, 3,000 from the United States. We asked half of them for a parental report about their children, and we asked half of them for a self-report. And we were asking them about mood changes. Did they experience a decrease in mood, more demoralization, more irritability, more sadness, more lack of joy? And we found that the number one risk factor was whether or not you had an anxiety or a depressive disorder before COVID, right? That would make sense that you are more sensitive if to begin with you were anxious or depressed. But so the second risk factor becomes very important. And so for adults, the second risk factor turned out to be COVID worries. Am I going to lose my job? How am I going to pay my bills? Is my mom or dad going to get sick? Am I going to be able to protect my own health? It was all COVID related. When you asked them about their parental report, for kids, it was life circumstances, a lack of structure, distance learning, social isolation. And it really proved that parents now had a bigger role than ever before. They had to give structure to the week. You know, Wednesday was going to be pizza night. We were going to look forward to Friday movie night as a family. And I say this all the time, you have to let the kids pick also, which means you might have to watch Ace Ventura 3 more times. But it's not the movie. It's the looking forward to the movie. It's the popcorn with the movie. It's the fact that we can still have fun even though movie theaters are closed. And now we surveyed these people in May. We surveyed this group again in November, and we're going to do it again in May. And Morgan Stanley is paying for the study. In November, remember, half the group is coming from the United Kingdom. Life circumstances has popped up as the second for individuals in England, where for adults on Adult Report, where they're saying, I can't stand the fact that I can't exercise. I can't stand the fact that, you know, I'm on top of each other, that I can't have sex with my spouse because there's no privacy in the house. And so that means that we have to step back and we have to think to ourselves, first of all, COVID's not over. You know, all good news coming. There's a light at the end of the tunnel. It's not a train about to get us. It's a vaccine that'll get everyone, which is terrific. But in the meantime, we really do have to structure our kids. And the second thing that we have to do is we have to have a regular ritual of gratitude. Remember about negative tracking. There has to be a moment once a week, whether it's Sunday brunch or it's Friday night dinner or Wednesday pizza night, where we always go around the table and we say, why are we lucky? Why are we happy? In the middle of this mess, I'm so glad we're together. I'm so glad that we're still healthy. I'm so glad I got my vaccine. I'm so glad that I still have my job. Some model for our children that, you know, it will be okay. And the other piece I think that parents are very worried about is their kids' academic growth. You know, I think that's the least of it. I think that if your kid is a typically developing child, they will make up this academic year. You know, schools will either have summer school or they'll do after school boot camp in September, or they'll do weekend school. They will catch up. No, typically developing kids will be able to make it up. I'm more concerned about the socialization. I'm really concerned about kids who are feeling socially isolated, kids who don't get to, you know, the kid who works so hard to be on varsity sports and there are no varsity sports, that kid he doesn't get a redo. And for kids 13 to 24, the losses they're taking are more significant than for us as adults or for younger kids. And I think it's a responsibility of parents to say, yes, this sucks. This is worse for you than it is for me. And I don't want to minimize it. I don't know if I can fix it, but let's think, are there things that can make it better? Do you think that, you know, you could go, you're a track star. Do you think you want to go running by yourself, you know, in the park every day? Do you want me to come with you? Do you want to, you know, do you want to go play soccer in the park? It's not the same as varsity soccer, but are there things to keep your skills up so that next year you'll be ready to do this again? You know, helping a kid fight demoralization.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And, you know, there was some hopeful data coming out of the UK from the first lockdown last year. It was sponsored by the National Health System. And they found, I don't know if you had seen these data, but they found some really interesting pockets of resilience among these kids. And what they found is that the kids who were more at risk had higher levels of social isolation, higher anxiety, maybe some peer problems at school. During lockdown, they were doing better.
Right. So I worry about, so you know what? I just wrote an op-ed for USA Today about those kids, because I'm worried that when reentry comes, and they, the only way you fight anxiety is exposure and response prevention, right? I'm going to go into the party. I'm going to not die. I will say hello to 3 people. I will raise my hand in class. I will separate from my mom, to go to school, and I'll try not to vomit. I will sleep in my own bed and stay there all night.
Oh, right. But the point of this, though, was that their family support, which is coming back to scaffolding, was probably that in
Better.
those families where there was good family support, it was working. And right. I agree with you 100% as an anxiety researcher that it is that exposure that when we avoid anxiety, it's the avoidance paradox.
It's a kind of a monster keeps growing larger and larger.
Yep, exactly. So no, I agree. And I'm interested to see your op-ed come out, because I think that it's those long-term impact.
So I would tell you the scaffolding that teachers and parents are going to have to do for those kids who look too good right now, and seem to be happy. I've had patients who said, I've been waiting my whole life for COVID. I love playing video games and staying at home. And I worry that it's going to be very hard to get back to college. Do you mean, and to deal with the kid next to you who talks to you or says, let's have a cup of coffee, or the teacher who calls on you and you can't answer the question. But I think there's something to be said about resilience and adversity. Now, I wouldn't wish COVID on anyone, but like other horrible events, World War I, World War II, the Great Depression, people did get more resilient. The expression, if it doesn't kill you, it makes you stronger. Well, there will be certain kids who were scaffolded properly, who were supported, who had that structure and that support. They will be more resilient than we can imagine. That's an amazing phenomenon. Now, these were not the pre-anxious kids or the pre-depressed kids, but I am pretty convinced that there may be a silver lining for certain kids who will say, I endured that, I can endure something else. You mean it's...
And that's right. And that's the whole point of when we scaffold, we don't protect our kids. We build their capacity. And, It reminds me of that great study coming out of Yale Child Study Center, where they looked at kids who were clinically anxious, and they gave, some of them gold standard, evidence-based gold standard CBT. And then the other half, they treated the parents. And if you recall this study, what they did is they taught the parents to not help their kids avoid those challenges. They helped them face them. They scaffolded them. And those kids, at the end of 6 weeks of therapy, the kids whose parents received the training in scaffolding essentially were doing just as well as the kids who got CBT directly.
So if you think about it, every time you go in an airplane, the flight attendant says, put the mask on yourself before you put it on the kids if the pressure drops. And my gut feeling is, how could I do that? Well, if you don't take care of yourself, you can't take care of your kids. And if your example for your kid is, I'm going to sacrifice everything for you, that message is, well, I'm pretty inadequate because my mother and father don't even think they should breathe. They should give me everything because I'm not capable of waiting 5 seconds after they put the mask on. And so I think we forget that this rescuing that we're always doing is really not in a service for the children. It just takes care of our anxiety.
Right, and that's right. It's managing ourselves, and the implicit message, as you say, is that you're so messed up that I need to do this. So that's
you're incompetent. A really good point. Right. You're not secure. You're not resilient.
Well, why don't we? I think it's time now that we turn to Q&A. What do you say, Harold?
Okay.
And I will ask Mac. I'll welcome you on. Thank you so much for being here. And why don't you share a couple of the questions that our audience has been putting in the chat?
Will do, Tracy. Thanks. And there are some good questions here that I'll read to you now. Here's one from an anonymous attendee. If you have a middle schooler and you feel like you have not built a great scaffold yet, is it too late? I have a 13-year-old and feel disconnected.
No, the message I hope that you'll get is 2 things. One, it's always time to change your parenting and to make it better and to build a scaffold. And I think your teenagers are going to test you. Really, they're pushing and pulling. They want to get away from you. They need you, and it really takes a lot of effort for us to think to ourselves, how are we going to be able to separate and make sure that we're the scaffold, we're not smothering them and we're not letting them loose. And so I would tell you, the same principles of a 4-year-old, where you say to your 4-year-old, I'd like you to take your pajamas off and put your clothes on. And it's so much easier to just take their pajamas off and put the clothes on. But if you let them struggle a little bit, they will feel better, they'll have mastery, and your life, it becomes easier as well. And I think a 13 or 14-year-old, it works the same way, that you want to go back to support, structure, encouragement, and then hold back patience. You still are going to teach them things, awareness about their strengths and weaknesses, warmth always counts, dispassion, and then monitoring. And are we making progress? Because if we're not making progress, we got to do something new.
Eden Williams sets up her question this way. My 11-year-old son in the 5th grade is glued to his screen. After school each day, he runs to his room, slams the door, and starts to play Roblox with or without his friends. This is all he wants to do. It is so hard to get him to do anything else. Also, he just made some online friends, which he is particularly excited about. How do we get him off this track in a productive way?
So, before COVID, we were really very strict about this. A lot of data on how bad screens are, especially if it goes over a certain amount. So we actually did a study called problematic internet usage, and we coined it as a disorder, that kids who use social media more than 6 to 8 hours a day, it can interfere with their functioning. And particularly if they have ADHD or depression, it will make their symptoms worse. The way to think about it is pot or marijuana can make things worse if you have an anxiety disorder. It can make you more anxious. So those rules were much easier to abide by when we didn't have COVID. And where we are not having extracurricular activities, where we are not having after school, or we're not even having school in some cases, it is very problematic for us to clearly say, oh, we're going to let them use the screen more, but not unlimited. And I think this requires a conversation. You get a lot of, I think you're getting a lot of pleasure out of this. I love the fact that you're getting joy from playing these games and meeting these friends. Nevertheless, we need to figure out how much time is appropriate. Is it 1 hour? Would you like half an hour? Let's think about it. And for every hour you do that, I'd like you to spend an hour having a conversation, playing with your siblings, or I'd like you to go outside in the park with me for an hour. So we'll make some kind of swap. Again, there's some kind of negotiation where you're basically saying, I understand how important this is, but as your parent, I need to give you some structure. I wouldn't let you run into the street. This is not particularly healthy for you. And I know you think it's great. I also think screens should be taken away from kids at nighttime. There's 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, you take the screens away and you lock, you put them in your closet along with your phones, and you give yourself 8 hours where you are screenless. And the same thing goes on in meals. If you're going to sit down and have one meal together for 20 minutes, the screens have to be put in a basket somewhere on a table or on a counter somewhere, and you're going to be with each other. One of the things we talk about in the book is how to have small talk and how to have the big talks. But if you as a parent should treat your kids like you were treating a client, or remember what it was like to go out on a date, you have to have good questions. If you ask questions like, what did you learn at school today? The answer is nothing. If you say, what did you do when you were at your friend Jimmy's? Or what was the best part of the baseball game today? Or what was the best part of your social studies class today? That becomes an easier way to saying it was this. What was the worst part? And if you don't ask the questions in the right way, it means that small talk isn't going to occur. And you want to model, by the way, how small talk works. And you want also to let your child know that people love to talk about themselves. So asking you questions is a very appropriate thing to do. Ask 3 you questions and you'll get a conversation started.
One thing I'll add, Mac, too, is I love to, when I talk to parents about this, I love to kind of raise this idea of raising digital citizens, that when we talk with our kids, and as Harold's mentioning, as we kind of have this conversation with them, what we're really doing is we're raising digital citizens who have knowledge, who are empowered, that we give structure to, but also need to start internalizing the ability to make those healthy choices. So I think when we take that attitude of citizenship and start having these conversations and understanding their world, because you know what, right now, sometimes the only times you can see friends are online. So
Right.
that often helps. And also we do have to be role models of healthy digital use. And all of us, if we can forgive ourselves a little, all of us are a mess right now when it comes to
Right, but you
screens.
also can see that, in the old days, pre-COVID, you go to a restaurant and you would notice that one of the kids had, earphones on and was watching a video, and the other kid, a little baby, was watching some screen, and mom and dad were on their phones. You felt like going over to the table and saying, "No, this
Yeah.
is not good.
And I
Let's
think that is,
let's have 20 minutes." Right.
I'm hoping we come out of this realizing, you know what, we've had enough of that kind of life, and we need to start making choices where when we tune in to how it feels to be on screens all the time, we realize, wait a second, I don't want to be on that screen when I'm at dinner with my family. And by the way, I agree with Harold too. There should be no screens at dinner. And even when the infant is crying and the things are happening, I think if we do as much of avoiding that as we can, I think that is one quick fix that will that helps a lot with creating new habits.
Okay, Michelle Passant asks, is bribing with money and privileges considered scaffolding? And she concedes that she's trying to rationalize her positive reinforcement of her high school junior.
I'll definitely let you
Well,
take this one, Harold.
No, there's a whole section of the book where we talk about the fact that it is not bribery. Where in the real world, we get bonuses for doing things we don't like or things that are added to our plate. And we are given bonuses for that, or pluses, or positive reinforcement. And so there are lots of times where kids are miserable to, when you say we're going to the nursing home to see grandma and grandpa, and the old people there are not necessarily your grandparents, they're the friends of your grandparents. And we want our moody teenager to smile and to, make chit chat and make small talk. And it is not easy, and they don't want to do it. And I don't think there's anything wrong with saying, you know what, I think that there's an increased bonus in your allowance if you can come and you can be pleasant to grandma and grandpa. Why? Because the next time they do it, they don't get the same bonus. They've just gotten a new skill, and you now move the bonus so that there's two other things that they have to do also. And I think that that's okay. It's not that you're paying them off. You are making them do something that's a stretch, that feels hard, and the next time they're going to have to stretch a little bit further.
And the intermittent part of that is really important, that you don't do it every time. And we know that if you want to increase the behavior, you inconsistently reinforce it. So they don't know when it's
Right,
coming.
so
So they'll keep on doing it.
Right, but remember also that can happen when we are yelling at our kids intermittently. That's not a good idea. So I always think of the pigeon in the cage with the little disc. And if you give the pigeon a pellet every 5 taps, after the pigeon has enough to eat, it stops. If you give the pigeon a pellet after 1 tap, and then after 15 taps, and after 18 taps, and then after 3 taps, the pigeon is just tapping away. So inconsistent reinforcement, Tracy's right, is the strongest one, but it can be done positively or it can be negatively. And I certainly think when it comes to teenagers, that's really important, that that you're pushing them out of their comfort zone, and you're going to make it a little bit easier to go into that growth zone.
Moises Hernandez.
To answer the question, don't feel guilty.
Terrific. Moises Hernandez asks if you know or are aware of any research that suggests that scaffolding may be helpful for other types of interpersonal relationships, or perhaps as a self-talk cognitive strategy.
So the whole concept of scaffolding really comes from an educational background, and that great teachers and great educational institutions are basically scaffolding and getting kids and students to move more and more out of their comfort zone and learn more and more. I can tell you that there's the technique that we talk about catching your kid being good and saying 3 positives before you ever say something negative or constructive. And that actually works for all relationships. It certainly works for husbands and wives. It works for employees. That the whole idea of this negative tracking that we do, and especially when our patience is spent, we're more irritable and we're going to catch more bad behavior. It's going to make it very difficult for your kid or your spouse or your employee or your employer to hear your request. And I think that if you can step back, take a deep breath and say, I'm going to try it again, just for 2 weeks, I think you'd be amazed at how much better your interaction is going to be when you do that. When you think to yourself, I'm going to give encouragement, I'm going to be supportive, I'm going to give myself some structure. I mean, I went to the internist for my annual physical, and the internist says to me, there are going to be 3 types of people that are coming out of COVID: hunks, chunks, and drunks. And the way you're going, Harold, you're going to be a drunken chunk. So all I need to do is be told that and then be given a prescription. So his prescription was take a walk every day and stop drinking during dinner. And I knew it was already a problem because when you called the liquor store, they recognized my voice. So I didn't even have to say my name. So I figured hunk left the room a long time ago. So the goal was not to become a hunk, but realistically to support myself, to encourage myself, to structure myself so that I will not gain weight, that I won't start depending on self-medicating myself with wine every night at dinner, and that I start thinking about it before dinner. So we can do this all the time. We can become much better to ourselves, we can be much better parents, and our kids will thank us for it. Because at the end of the day, what we really want is that answer to all those parents who said, I worry about my child. You want your child to be able to be independent. I mean, there's a story in the book that it's not complete. My oldest son had decided when he was in high school, he was going to become a DJ. I wanted a doctor. This kid loves science. I love being a doctor. I wanted him to be a doctor. By 10th grade or 11th grade, he said to me, Dad, I'm not going to become a doctor. I hate blood and I don't want to be a psychiatrist. I'm always going to be the wrong Dr. Koplowitz. I'm not going to become a doctor. So my scaffold that I was building for a doctor was not working. And when he said he was going to be a DJ, I thought, okay, he's going to be a DJ. There were 3 white DJs at the time, white Jewish DJs. Mark Ronson, who went on to win an Academy Award with Lady Gaga, DJ Cassidy, who played for the inauguration concert, and DJ Josh K. So we thought, okay, we're not building a skyscraper, we're building a ranch. And so we have to move our scaffold. And then he spent the summer between junior and senior year of college at a bank. And he came out of it and said, oh, I'm going to work for a bank. I'm going to do private equity. And so the scaffolding changes again, because at the end of the day, you don't live in your kid's house. No matter how quirky it is, no matter how odd, it's a Victorian, you want it mid-century, you really have to scaffold because you have to let your kid live in that house. And that's not easy for a lot of parents who are being helicopter or snowplow or concierge, because they have to recognize they don't know best. All they know is how to be supportive and structured, encouraging, and then the kid will decide what house they want to live in.
Well, I think that's a great metaphor and a beautiful image to end on. I think we are at time. Is that right, Mac? Or do we have time for any more questions?
We're very close to the end.
I'm going to take one more question, Mac.
Okay,
Great.
there's a sort of preponderance here in the Q&A of questions about how to prepare for re-socialization. Parents looking for advice on how to prepare their child for re-entry into the world, perhaps this fall. And so it's sort of, as a representation of those questions, here's a parent asking, how do I prepare her for I just said it this way. How do I prepare her to re-enter the world post-COVID? It seems as though she will be just one of many who need this kind of help. Another parent saying she doesn't feel safe about the prospect of returning to the outside world.
So let's start with practice. So, I'd pick up the phone and I would call school, especially if your kids are on Zoom, and say to the teacher, could you do me a favor and please call on my daughter or my son at least once or twice during class. It's much easier to hide during a Zoom class than it is in a regular class. So you want to remember what traits about anxiety. You want to exposure and response prevention. You don't want to feed the anxiety, you want to fight it. For parents to say, let's have an outdoor date. Let's find another family that's behaving the way we are, and let's go for a walk in the park, and let's have the kids, hang out together. Let's give them an activity to do, whether it's playing Monopoly online or whether it's kicking a ball in the park, where we are not going to let them, we're not going to change what they're doing. We're going to let them interact. So we're going to expose our kids to social interaction, to teacher interaction, in a way that they don't even have to know about, that we're just trying to manipulate the environment to make it easier for them when they do have to re-enter. And I would also tell you that the only silver lining, and I have trouble with this word, is that if you see that your kid is really suffering now, don't wait. Telehealth has turned out to be the only silver lining. Call your pediatrician, ask them for some help, and you can get a mental health professional on a screen to talk to your kids. And I'll give you a plug for childmind.org. Go to childmind.org, look at our symptom checker, figure out, am I worried about nothing or is this something significant? And then reach out and get yourself and get your child a telehealth appointment. The average parent in America waits 2 to 8 years from the onset of symptoms till they get help. And I would tell you that only 1 out of 5 kids have a mental health disorder, but every child's mental health is affected by COVID. They are socially more isolated. They're going to have more bumps. They may not have a mental health disorder, but parents could use some good advice as to how to scaffold them during this very awful event. This is the catastrophe I was talking about in the book that can shake the whole scaffold and take the building down. So don't do this alone. Go get some help.
So I think on that note, I think we should end for tonight. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. Harold, congratulations on your wonderful book. It's been a
Thank
pleasure
you.
speaking with you.
Thank you for doing this, Tracy. It's such a pleasure.
It was fun.
Thanks, Matt.
Okay,
Thank you
take
both.
care, everyone. Thank you again. And everyone
Bye.
be well.
Bye-bye.
Bye.